Today, we've been discussing the role of the likes of Elon Musk and X and other social media platforms when it's come to the riots. Have they been stoking, fanning the flames of tensions that, of course, led to that horrific violence across the country? But what of foreign hostile actors, namely Russia? Did the Kremlin and its agency, the Foreign Intelligence Agency, the FSB, play a role in stoking up or at least giving credence to those on social media, which of course played a significant part in those far-right riots? Let's speak to a man who knows the Russian machine all too well. That's the former intelligence officer Christopher Steele. He ran the Russia desk for MI6 and he joins us now. Good morning, Christopher Steele.
Hi, Theo.
For you, is it clear that there is Russian involvement?
Yes, I think it's clear there is some Russian involvement. The degree to which that's happened and the effectiveness, I think, is still out for question. I mean, when you look at the original disinformation that surrounded the Southport killings, that does seem to have come from a Russian-linked website. And of course, after that, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesman herself, Maria Zakharova, actually tweeted out that basically the rioters were in the right, questioning the government and so on. We've also got a situation where Tommy Robinson, who's one of the instigators, I think, of this situation, paid a visit to Moscow, a very interesting one in 2020, in which he met with various people on the Russian sort of nationalist right. And indeed, one guy he met with called Malkovich, who is sanctioned by the US for involvement in foreign interference operations. So I think there's quite a lot there to get our teeth into.
Do you think that our security services will be doing exactly that at this present time?
Yes, I'm sure they are, and I hope they are. I think the main point, of course, is that Russia considers itself at war, in an existential war with Ukraine, but also effectively at war with the West and with NATO. And you only have to look at the plot that was uncovered a few weeks ago to assassinate a German industrialist running an arms manufacturing company which supplies Ukraine to realize just how the gloves are off. And in fact, it's in very much Russia's interest to destabilize countries like Britain and the United States.
And when MI6 are conducting these, and they're going to be covert operations, no doubt, but when they're doing this work, is there a are they looking at the phone records, the messages that have been potentially sent by people operating on social media in this country, and of course foreign actors as well, to see if there's a link? And are there penalties that can be, I'm talking criminal penalties here, that can be imposed if you are found to have coordinated your social media postings with Russian agents?
Yes, there's a difference here between what you would call counterintelligence, which is protecting our secrets, to counter-subversion, which is preventing Russia and indeed other foreign governments from interfering in our politics and destabilizing our society. So I think the security service will be looking very carefully at the instigators of these activities, including people like Tommy Robinson, even conceivably Nigel Farage, who incidentally said that we were being misinformed by the government about Southport. And they'll be looking at things like their travel movements, who they've been in touch with, monetary transfers and so on, because that will reveal, or not, as the case may be, a pattern of behavior which can lead to some conclusions about the degree to which Russia has been interfering in this situation.
So just to be clear, MI6, they'll be looking at Nigel Farage's his travel movements, potentially his mobile phone messages, the way what he's posted on social media, to see whether there are links with the Russians on this.
The security services require warrants, obviously, to do some of that. But I think essentially looking at communications, looking at travel, looking at financial transfers is the heart of this problem. And if we're going to get to the bottom of it, certainly the government should be doing those things. In terms of the instigators, now whether Nigel Farage in the end is defined as an instigator of this, I don't know. Tommy Robinson certainly is, and others, of course, like Andrew Tate. So I think that will be a focus of attention, certainly.
And where do you think the government will also, and the intelligence services will also be looking at, and I'm thinking here of, what happened in Southport. It caused such psychological, or was designed to cause such psychological damage, this attack, and it is obviously it's subject to a criminal investigation now, on children at a Taylor Swift dance party. Will they be looking, the security services, if you like, at one of those, at a jigsaw of what's been happening in this country, and will they be looking potentially for links between what happened in Southport as being something directly designed to be used almost as a sort of lifting point, a bouncing off point for the riots that we've seen in this country, as a way of whipping up tension and hostility on the streets of Britain?
Yeah, I mean, I think bear in mind that Britain is probably Ukraine's strongest ally and is really material in terms of Ukraine's ability to fight Russia in the east, particularly. And so, yes, they'll be looking at things like that. I think it would be far-fetched to think that an incident like Southport was manufactured by a foreign power. However, the foreign power might well be looking at trigger incidents in which they can exploit situations that occur spontaneously in order to create a bigger political effect. And I suspect that may have been happening here. One of the theories that has been going around is that Russia was indeed planning to destabilize the UK and look for excuses to do so, and that was planned for this summer prior to an expected October general election. And of course, we had the election surprisingly early, and they would have been caught napping. So I think there are all sorts of questions here which emerge, and I think we're seeing some evidence of this in other countries. The other thing I would say is that one of the new Russian sort of modus operandi, if you like, is that they've now been caught out in the UK. If you remember, there was a Ukrainian warehouse in London that was firebombed. They've been caught out basically hiring effectively local indigenous criminal elements to carry out their work. And of course, the advantage of that is it's relatively cheap and it's relatively deniable. So I think we shouldn't rule anything out in terms of incidents like Southport, but I think to think that Southport itself was somehow staged with this in mind is very far-fetched.
What needs to happen? What needs to, thanks for clarifying, I appreciate it, but what needs to happen now from the intelligence services? What do they need to do, Christopher Steele? Because are we going to find ourselves in a situation where we see these riots that we've seen on the streets of Britain suddenly become a regular occurrence, or is there a way of actually dealing with these Russian state actors to stop them acting in the way that they are to whip up horrendous violence and tension on the streets of Britain?
Yeah, I suspect that you're never going to finally cut them off, but I think exposing them, cutting off any sort of links they have with local criminals in the UK, things like that will be essential work. And it's police work as much as it is actually the security service. But I think also looking upstream inside Russia itself to understand what the actual plan is. Now, we received some intelligence about a year ago, which said that in the past, Russia had been interested in supporting and stoking up both the extreme right and the extreme left in Europe. And that from that point on, Putin had decided that the extreme right would be the main focus for this agitation and subversion. So in a way, it doesn't surprise me that it's manifesting in the way that it has. And in order to understand that properly, we have to have intelligence from upstream in Moscow as to who the main actors are and what they're trying to achieve.
What do you think the end game is? Is it just a stronger Russia and a weaker Europe, or is there something that goes beyond that?
I think it's to basically create unrest and division and violence and crime within our societies. I think Russia is fully locked into a war at the moment that it's not winning. Particularly in the last few days, we've seen an extraordinary Ukrainian counteroffensive that will undoubtedly be sucking in all their attention for the moment. But they don't go away for long. We've seen, from 2016 onwards, really, with the US election then and Brexit, that the Russians very much favor this sort of underhand subversive operation. And we have to put the resources and get the skills that we need in our security services and police to be alert to it and to disrupt it.
Final question. How, with Ukraine in mind, how potentially dangerous is a Trump presidency for Europe if he cuts off American funding, US funding for President Zelensky's war effort?
I think it would be catastrophic. My impression, strong view, is that there is a sort of settlement plan, I'm not going to call it a peace plan, being hatched by Moscow and Viktor Orban of Hungary, which Trump is almost certainly signed up to, which would get Putin off the hook and give him probably 20% of Ukrainian territory. Now, that would be catastrophic. And of course, Trump would be in the position, if he was president, to cut off Ukrainian military aid. And we saw what happened in the 6-month period when that was the case before, and Ukraine was pushed back on the battlefield. So I think it's a really key element as to how the war in Ukraine pans out, that we see Vice President Harris win and continue the strong support for Ukrainian democracy and its sovereign rights. And I think that will be critical.
Just you say you used the word catastrophic. What you mean by that is that, okay, Putin takes 20% of Ukraine, but what, he then comes back for a NATO signatory?
I think you would probably see mass refugees pouring into Europe at that point. I mean, I don't want to go too deeply into this rabbit hole, but if Putin were to prevail in Ukraine, I think Europe would be fundamentally unstable for many, many years to come. And I suspect that whilst Russia has exhausted its military power at the moment, it would buy itself time to rearm and to re-equip. And without the sort of American guarantees, Article 5 of NATO, mutual defense and so on, that Russia may well take a swipe at the Baltic states or somewhere else in due course, probably a few years down the line. But the trend would be set, and it would be, as I say, for European security and peace, catastrophic in my view.
Christopher Steele, who of course ran the Russia desk at MI6, I really appreciate your time with us this afternoon, and thank you for all of those really valuable insights. Very grateful.